Samuel Carter's hands shook as he stared at the eviction notice, 72 hours to save his daughter's home. Then his phone rang. "Mr. Carter, the position is yours. $80,000 a year. But understand this, my employer doesn't tolerate questions, emotions, or friendship. Can you handle that?" Samuel looked at 10-year-old Grace, silent since her mother's funeral 6 months ago. "Yes," he whispered, not knowing he'd just agreed to work for the woman the entire town called heartless. Before we begin, please subscribe and hit that notification bell because this story will take you places you never expected. And comment below with your city or country so I can see how far this story travels across the world. Thank you, and let's dive in. Your mother would have hated me for this. Samuel Carter said it out loud to the empty kitchen, the eviction notice still trembling in his hand. Grace sat at the table, her untouched oatmeal growing cold, her eyes fixed on nothing. She hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since the funeral. Not since they'd lowered Emily into the ground while rain hammered the cemetery like God himself was weeping. The classified section lay spread across the table, circled ads bleeding into coffee stains. Dishwasher, night shift janitor, grocery bagger. None of them paid enough. None of them would keep the lights on, keep Grace in her school, keep the wolves from the door. Then his eyes caught something different. Private driver position, Mystic CT. $80,000 per year, discretion required, immediate start. Samuel read it 3 times. $80,000. That was more than he'd made in 2 years combined since Emily got sick. It had to be a scam. Or worse. But desperation makes gamblers of honest men. He dialed the number with shaking fingers. A woman answered on the first ring. "Whitmore residence? I'm calling about the driver position. Hold, please." Silence. Then a different voice, crisp, businesslike, utterly cold. "You have experience?" "Yes, ma'am. 10 years driving for executive transport before criminal record. No, it's references. Yes, I can provide, but can you start Monday?" Samuel's heart hammered. "Yes, but I need to know." "The position is yours, Mr. Fur Carter. $80,000 annually. You'll drive Mrs. Whitmore to her appointments. You'll arrive at 7 a.m. sharp. You'll speak only when spoken to. You'll ask no personal questions. Can you handle that?" Through the kitchen window, Samuel watched Grace sitting motionless in the backyard, staring at the swing her mother used to push her on. "Yes." "Monday, 7 a.m. Don't be late." The line went dead. Grace turned slowly to look at him through the window, in her dark eyes holding questions she couldn't voice, or wouldn't. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart," Samuel whispered to the empty kitchen. "Daddy found a job." But as he said it, something cold settled in his chest. Jobs that paid $80,000 for driving didn't require that level of secrecy unless something was very, very wrong. Monday morning arrived wrapped in October fog, the kind that made Mystic look like it belonged in a ghost story. Samuel had pressed his one good suit, shined his shoes until he could see his reflection, and left Grace with Mrs. Chen next door, a kind widow who'd been bringing casserole since Emily died. "You call me if you need anything," Mrs. Chen had said, squeezing his hand. Anything at all? Grace hadn't even looked up from her coloring book. She was coloring everything gray now. The sunshine, the flowers, the people. All gray. The address led Samuel to the edge of town where the mansions began, old money houses with names instead of numbers. Whitmore Estate sat behind iron gates that opened automatically as his car approached, like the house itself had been watching, waiting. The driveway curved through manicured grounds that should have been beautiful but felt somehow abandoned. Empty fountains, gardens too perfect to be lived in, statues that looked like centuries. The mansion itself was magnificent and terrible, all white stone and tall windows that reflected nothing but sky. It looked like a mausoleum for the living. Samuel parked by the garage where a pristine black Mercedes waited, keys already in the ignition. A note lay on the driver's seat. "Mrs. Whitmore will be out at 7:00 a.m. precisely. First stop Mercy Hospital. No music, no conversation. Windows up." He checked his watch. 6:58 a.m. At exactly 7 o'clock, the front door opened. Margaret Whitmore was not what Samuel expected. She couldn't have been more than 55, but she moved like a woman twice that age, slow, deliberate, as if every step required permission. She wore a black designer suit that probably cost more than Samuel's car, her silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. But it was her eyes that struck him. Empty. Utterly, completely empty. She didn't acknowledge Samuel as he held the door open. Didn't look at him as she slid into the back seat. Didn't speak. Samuel got behind the wheel, adjusted the mirrors, and pulled out of the estate. The silence was suffocating. He'd driven executives before chatty CEOs who treated drivers like therapists, anxious lawyers who made calls the entire trip, friendly grandmothers who wanted to know about his family. Margaret Whitmore was none of these. She sat in the back like a statue, staring out the window at a world she didn't seem to see. Mercy Hospital loomed ahead, all concrete and glass. Samuel pulled up to the entrance. Without a word, Margaret got out and disappeared inside. Samuel waited and waited. The parking meter ticked past an hour, then 2. Other cars came and went. Families hustled in with flowers and worried faces. Ambulances screamed past. Margaret emerged 3 hours later looking exactly the same, empty eyes, rigid posture, that terrible silence. She got in the car. Samuel waited for instructions. None came. "Where to next, Mrs. Whitmore?" She handed him a card. Peterson and Associates law firm, downtown. The law office visit lasted 2 hours, then a cemetery, Oak Hill Memorial, where she stood before a grave for 45 minutes without moving. Then back to the estate. Not one word. Not even thank you. As Samuel held the car door open, Margaret finally looked at him. Really looked. Her eyes swept over his face like she was memorizing it, cataloging it, filing it away in some mental database of disappointments. "Same time tomorrow," she said. Her voice was frost on glass. Then she was gone, the mansion door closing behind her with a sound like a crypt ceiling. Samuel drove home in a daze. $80,000 for driving in silence, for being invisible, for asking no questions. It should have felt like winning the lottery. Instead, it felt like accepting a job as the ferryman for the living dead. Grace was asleep when he got home, curled on Mrs. Chen's couch with her gray crayons scattered around her like fallen leaves. "She didn't eat again," Mrs. Chen said softly. "Just colored all afternoon." "How was the new job?" Samuel looked at the check in his pocket, the first week's pay delivered by courier an hour ago. More money than he'd seen in months. "It's fine," he lied. "It's going to be fine." But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Samuel couldn't shake the image of Margaret Whitmore standing alone at that grave. The way she'd stood so still, like a monument to grief itself. He'd seen that kind of stillness before. In his own mirror the months after Emily died. The difference was he'd had Grace to bring him back. Margaret Whitmore had no one. The days blurred together into a routine of silence. 7 a.m. pickup, hospital visit, sometimes Mercy, sometimes Hartford General, always alone. Law offices, real estate appointments where Margaret would disappear into buildings and emerge looking more tired than before. And always the cemetery. Samuel learned to read her the way sailors learned to read the sea, tiny shifts in posture that meant turn here a particular silence, that meant she needed more time, the way her hand would tremble slightly before entering certain buildings. He learned other things too, things he wasn't supposed to notice. The prescription bottles she tried to hide in her purse. Anti-anxiety medication, sleeping pills. The way she would sometimes grip the door handle so tight her knuckles went white. The photograph she kept in her briefcase, a teenage boy with her eyes and a smile that could light up the world. She'd look at it sometimes when she thought Samuel wasn't watching, and her empty eyes would fill with something that might have been pain, if pain could kill. 3 weeks in, Samuel broke the rules. They were stopped at a red light, and he saw her in the rearview mirror staring at that photograph again. Her hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "That's a good photo," Samuel said quietly. Margaret's eyes snapped up to meet his in the mirror. For a moment he thought she might fire him on the spot. Then she did something he'd never seen her do. She smiled. It was broken and brief, gone almost before it existed. But it was real. "His name was Michael," she whispered. "He was 17. Was. Samuel's chest tightened. He understood that word. That terrible past tense that turned people into memories. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Margaret's smile vanished like it had never been. The wall came back up brick by brick right before his eyes. "Drive?" she said, her voice cold again. "Please." But Samuel had seen it. The crack in the armor. The human being trapped inside the fortress. That evening, Samuel found Grace in her room, surrounded by her gray drawings. "Baby girl, can I show you something?" She looked up with those big, sad eyes that broke his heart daily. He pulled out a box from the closet, Emily's art supplies. His wife had been a painter before the sickness came. Watercolors and brushes and canvases that still smelled like her. Your mama used to say that sad colors make the bright ones shine brighter. Samuel said, his voice thick. She said you can't have yellow without gray, can't have hope without knowing what hopeless feels like. Grace stared at the paints. Then slowly she reached out and picked up a brush. She didn't speak, but she dipped that brush in the yellow sunshine, yellow Emily's favorite, and made a single stroke across the gray page. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. That's beautiful, baby. That's so beautiful. Grace looked up at him, and for the first time in 6 months, something flickered in her eyes that wasn't just grief. It was the tiniest spark of life. The next morning, Samuel arrived at the estate at 6:55 a.m., 5 minutes early like always. But something was different. The front door was open. Samuel's instinct screamed danger. He ran up the steps, heart hammering. Mrs. Whitmore? Silence. He found her in what must have been the living room, though it looked more like a museum, every surface perfect and cold and untouched by human warmth. Margaret sat on a white couch in yesterday's clothes, an empty wine bottle on the table beside her, tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide them, didn't even seem to notice Samuel was there. Mrs. Whitmore, Samuel said softly. She looked at him like she was seeing him from a very great distance. He died in this house, she whispered. 3 years ago. Overdose. I found him in his bedroom with that needle still in his arm, and I couldn't. Her voice broke. Samuel did something that could have cost him his job. He sat down beside her. My wife died 6 months ago, he said quietly. Cancer. By the end, she didn't even look like herself anymore, and I thought I'd die too. I thought my heart would just stop, because how do you keep beating when the person who made you want to live is gone? Margaret turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time since he'd started working for her. How did you survive it? She asked, her voice raw. I didn't, Samuel said honestly. I didn't survive her death. I just kept going because my daughter needed me to. Because I couldn't let her lose both parents. So I got up every morning, even though I didn't want to. I made breakfast even though I couldn't taste it. I smiled even though I was dying inside. And slowly, so slowly, I didn't even notice it happening. The pretending became real again. I don't have a daughter, Margaret said flatly. I don't have anyone. Michael was all I had and I failed him. I was too busy building my empire, making my fortune, proving I was worth something. And my son needed me and I wasn't there, and now he's gone and all I have is this house full of things that don't matter, and money that can't buy him back. They sat in silence, two broken people in a house that felt like a tomb. Maybe that's all any of us can do, Margaret said, finally echoing Samuel's words. Just keep going. Yeah, Samuel said. Maybe that is enough. Margaret called in sick that day, the first time since Samuel started. He drove home thinking about her alone in that house, drowning in memories. He found Grace painting at the kitchen table. Not just yellow on gray, now red and blue and green. The colors weren't quite right and the shapes were messy, but it was life. It was hope. It was his daughter coming back to him one brushstroke at a time. What are you painting, sweetheart? Grace looked up at him, and then, miracle of miracles, she spoke. Her voice was rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Samuel had ever heard. Mama, she said. I'm painting Mama's garden. Samuel dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms and cried like he hadn't cried since the funeral. I love you so much, he sobbed. I love you so much, baby girl. I love you too, Daddy. Grace whispered into his shoulder. I'm sorry I stopped talking. I just couldn't find the words. You don't ever have to be sorry, Samuel said fiercely. Not ever. We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this together. And holding his daughter, feeling her small heart beat against his chest, Samuel understood something profound. Grief doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't follow a timeline or a schedule. But it also doesn't have to be faced alone. Margaret Whitmore had been facing hers alone for 3 years. Maybe Samuel thought it was time someone reminded her she didn't have to. The next morning, Samuel arrived at the estate with something he'd never brought before. Grace's painting. It wasn't sophisticated or technically perfect, but it showed a garden bursting with flowers, bright colors, celebrating life even as gray shadows reminded you that darkness existed. Broken things can be beautiful again, Grace had told him as she signed it. Mama told me about kintsugi, that Japanese thing where they fix broken pottery with gold. The cracks don't go away, but they make it more valuable. Samuel had stared at his 10-year-old daughter in wonder, seeing Emily's wisdom living on through her. Margaret emerged from the house at exactly 7 a.m. looking composed again. The mask was back in place, but Samuel knew what lived behind it now. As she got in the car, Samuel handed her the painting. "My daughter wanted you to have this." Margaret stared at it for a long moment. Samuel watched her face in the mirror, saw emotions flicker across it too fast to name. Then she carefully placed it in her briefcase right next to Michael's photograph. "Thank you," she said softly. "Tell Grace thank you." It wasn't much, 2 words, but it was more than she'd given anyone in years. They drove in silence, but it was different now. Not the oppressive silence of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of people who understood each other's pain. They were approaching Mercy Hospital when Margaret spoke again. "The hospital visits," she said. "I volunteer. In the cancer ward. I read to patients who don't have family. I've been doing it since Michael died. It's the only thing that makes me feel less like a monster." Samuel's throat tightened. That's not a monster. That's someone trying to find meaning in tragedy. Or someone trying to earn forgiveness for sins that can't be forgiven. "Maybe," Samuel said carefully. "Or maybe it's someone who learned that the hard way that being there matters more than being successful." Margaret didn't respond, but Samuel saw her hand reach out and touch Grace's painting fingers, tracing the bright flowers. "Your daughter sounds wise beyond her years. She gets that from her mother," Samuel said, his voice thick with love and loss. "Emily always said the worst moments teach us how to recognize the best ones." They pulled up to the hospital entrance. Before getting out, Margaret turned to look at Samuel directly, not in the mirror, but face to face. "Tomorrow is Saturday. I don't usually require your services on weekends, but there's something I'd like to show you if you're willing. Bring Grace." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Show me what—" For the first time since he'd met her, Margaret Whitmore smiled a real smile, small and uncertain, but real. "The beginning of an answer," she said. Then she was gone, disappearing into the hospital to read to strangers, to give comfort to people she'd never met, to try to fill the hole her son had left behind with something that mattered. Samuel sat in the car, Grace's painting visible in Margaret's briefcase through the window, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a drowning man, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who realizes that broken people can help each other heal. That sometimes the job nobody wanted turns out to be exactly what you needed. That redemption doesn't come from grand gestures, but from small moments of connection between wounded souls. Margaret Whitmore was the ice queen of Mystic, the ruthless real estate mogul who'd built an empire on other people's dreams. But she was also a grieving mother who read to dying strangers because she couldn't save her own son. She was a woman who'd forgotten how to live because she'd never forgiven herself for failing to prevent a death. She was, Samuel realized, exactly like him, just further down the road of grief, lost in territories he hadn't yet explored. But maybe, just maybe, he could help her find her way back, the way Grace's yellow brushstrokes were helping him find his. That night, Samuel tucked Grace into bed and told her about Margaret's invitation. "Are we going to see her house?" Grace asked, her voice stronger now, more like the daughter he remembered. "I don't know, baby. She just said she wanted to show us something." Grace was quiet for a moment then. "Is Mrs. Whitmore sad like we're sad?" Samuel's heart clenched. "Yes, sweetheart. She lost someone she loved very much, just like we lost Mama." "Then we should help her," Grace said simply. "That's what Mama would want." Samuel kissed her forehead, marveling at the resilience of children, at their ability to see clearly through the fog that blinded adults. "You're right," he whispered. "That's exactly what Mama would want." As he turned off her light, Grace called out one more time. "Daddy, do you think Mrs. Whitmore would like to see my other paintings?" Samuel looked back at his daughter, silhouetted in the dim hallway light, and saw Emily looking back at him, the same compassion, the same instinct to heal, the same refusal to let tragedy have the final word. "I think," he said softly, "she would love that very much." And somewhere across town, in a mansion that felt more like a mausoleum, Margaret Whitmore sat alone in the dark, Grace's painting on the table before her, and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not happiness, not yet. but the tiny fragile possibility that maybe happiness could exist again someday, that maybe broken things could be beautiful, that maybe the cracks filled with gold weren't weaknesses but proof of survival. The house was still silent, the rooms were still empty, the loss was still absolute. But for the first time since Michael died, Margaret Whitmore went to bed thinking about tomorrow instead of yesterday. It was a small thing, a tiny thing, but it was something. And sometimes Samuel had learned something was enough. Saturday morning arrived with autumn sunshine that made everything look almost hopeful. Samuel dressed Grace in her favorite yellow sweater Emily had bought it for her last birthday, and they drove to the Whitmore estate not knowing what to expect. Margaret was waiting outside and Samuel barely recognized her. She wore jeans, actual jeans, and a simple sweater. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked 10 years younger and somehow more fragile without the armor of her business suits. "Grace," Margaret said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "Thank you for the painting. It's the most beautiful thing anyone's given me in a very long time." Grace clutched her folder of other paintings tighter. "I brought more. Daddy said you might want to see them." Margaret's eyes glistened. "I would love that. But first there's something I need to show both of you." She led them not into the mansion, but around it to the back of the estate where Samuel had never been allowed. What he saw took his breath away. Behind the perfect, sterile mansion lay 20 acres of abandoned gardens. What had once been magnificent was now overgrown wild, dying. Fountains cracked and dry, pathways choked with weeds, statues covered in moss. "This was Michael's project," Margaret said quietly. "When he was 14, he got obsessed with gardening. Said he wanted to create something living, something that would outlast all of us. He spent 2 years planning these gardens, every plant, every path, every bench positioned exactly where he wanted them. He was going to apply to horticultural college." Her voice broke. "After he died, I let it all go. I couldn't bear to look at it. Couldn't bear to see his dream dying too. So I locked the gates and pretended it didn't exist." Grace pulled away from Samuel and walked into the ruins. She touched a dead rose bush, traced her fingers along a crumbling stone bench. "It's not dead," she said softly. "It's just sleeping. Like I was sleeping." Margaret stared at the little girl. "What do you mean?" Grace turned, and Samuel saw Emily looking out through their daughter's eyes again. That wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "After Mama died, everyone thought I was broken. But I wasn't broken. I was just so sad I couldn't find my words anymore. The words were still there, just sleeping inside me. These gardens are sad too. But they're not dead. They're waiting for someone to wake them up." Samuel watched tears stream down Margaret's face, not the contained, hidden tears he'd seen before, but full, ugly, healing tears. "I don't know how," Margaret whispered. "I don't know how to wake them up." "We could help," Grace said simply. "That's what friends do." The word hung in the air between them. Friends, as if it were that simple. As if a 10-year-old girl, a struggling single father, and a grief-stricken billionaire could somehow become friends over dead gardens and shared loss. Margaret looked at Samuel, her eyes asking a question she couldn't voice. "Grace is right," Samuel said. "That's what friends do." Margaret closed her eyes, and when she opened them, something had shifted. Some decision had been made. "I'll pay you extra. Overtime wages. I can hire a professional crew." "No," Samuel interrupted gently. "You can't pay us for this. This isn't a job. This is something else entirely." "Then why would you?" "Because you need it," Samuel said. "Because Grace needs it. Because I need it. Because we're all trying to figure out how to keep living when the people we loved are gone, and maybe this is how. Maybe this is the answer. Not therapy or medication or time. Maybe the answer is getting our hands dirty and growing something new from something that died." Margaret looked at him for a long moment, then at Grace standing among the ruins, then back at the mansion that had been her prison for 3 years. "Monday," she said. "We start Monday." Grace grinned, the first real smile Samuel had seen from her since the funeral. "Can I bring my painting supplies? I want to paint the gardens when they're alive again." "You can paint anything you want," Margaret said, and then did something that shocked Samuel to his core. She smiled, a real, genuine, reaching-the-eyes smile. "Thank you," she whispered, "both of you, for seeing what I couldn't see anymore." That night, Grace fell asleep with dirt under her fingernails and hope in her heart. Samuel sat on her bed watching her chest rise and fall and felt Emily's presence so strongly it hurt. "We're going to be okay," he whispered to his dead wife. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to be okay." His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Margaret. Is it too late to call?" Samuel stepped into the hallway. "No, is everything all right?" "I couldn't sleep." Her voice sounded different on the phone, younger, uncertain. "I keep thinking about what Grace said, about things sleeping instead of dying. Do you think that's true? Do you think people can wake up after grief puts them to sleep?" Samuel leaned against the wall, exhausted and exhilarated. "I don't know. 6 months ago, I would have said no. I would have said grief kills you, or it doesn't, and if it doesn't kill you, you're just pretending to be alive." But Grace started painting again, and talking again. And I think maybe she's teaching me that sleeping isn't the same as dead. "I've been asleep for 3 years, Margaret said quietly. "I've been going through the motions, hospital visits, business meetings, pretending I'm still the person I was before, but I'm not. That person died with Michael, and I don't know who I am now." "Maybe you don't have to know yet," Samuel offered. "Maybe that's okay. Is it really okay to not know who you are anymore?" Samuel thought about that. About the man he'd been before Emily got sick, confident, optimistic, full of plans. That man was gone. In his place was someone harder, sadder, but maybe, just maybe, deeper. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think it is. I think maybe we're not supposed to stay the same after we lose someone we love. Maybe we're supposed to become someone new. Someone who carries them with us but isn't defined by losing them." Margaret was quiet for so long, Samuel thought she'd hung up. "Then, will you tell me about Emily?" So Samuel did. He told her about meeting Emily at a coffee shop where she was sketching strangers about their courthouse wedding, because they couldn't afford anything fancy, about Grace's birth and Emily's joy and the way she'd painted murals on Grace's nursery walls. He told her about the diagnosis, the treatments, the hope and false hope and final hopelessness. The way Emily had made him promise not to let grief destroy him, not to let it destroy Grace. "She made me promise to keep living," Samuel said, his voice rough. "She said grief was just love with nowhere to go, and I needed to find somewhere to put all that love. I didn't understand what she meant then, but I'm starting to." "Tell me about Michael," Samuel said gently. Margaret's breath hitched. "He was brilliant, funny, so much kinder than I ever was. He saw beauty in everything, insects, weeds, broken things. He'd bring home injured birds and nurse them back to health. He'd defend kids who got bullied at school. He was everything good that I'm not." "What happened?" Samuel asked, though he already knew. "Overdose?" That's what she'd said. But that there was always more to the story. "Depression," Margaret said flatly. "It started in high school. I didn't see it. I was too busy expanding my business, making my millions, proving to everyone that a woman could succeed in real estate. I thought Michael was fine. He got good grades, had friends, seemed happy. But he was dying inside, and I was too blind to notice." Her voice cracked. "By the time I realized something was wrong, he was already using. Started with prescription pills he took from my medicine cabinet. Then harder things. I put him in rehab, twice. He'd get clean, then relapse. Clean, then relapse. And I'd get angry. I'd lecture him about willpower and choices and wasting his potential. I didn't understand. I thought he was weak. I thought he was choosing drugs over his future, over me." "You didn't know," Samuel said. "I should have known." Margaret's voice rose raw with pain. "I was his mother. I should have seen that he wasn't choosing drugs. He was trying to stop the pain the only way he knew how. I should have gotten him better help. Should have been home more. Should have told him I loved him more than I love my company. But I didn't. And one night he locked himself in his room and took too much, and I found him the next morning and he was already cold." Samuel heard her sobbing on the other end of the line, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like they'd been held back for years. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," Samuel said firmly. "Don't you ever apologize for grieving your son." "But it's my fault." "No, depression isn't anyone's fault. Addiction isn't anyone's fault. You did the best you could with what you knew." "It wasn't enough." "It never feels like enough," Samuel said quietly. "Emily made me promise to keep living, and I still feel like I'm failing her every day. I still feel like I should have done more, been more found. Better doctors tried harder, but she's still gone, and Michael's still gone, and we're still here, and maybe that means something. Margaret's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shaky breathing. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for listening. Anytime, Samuel said, and meant it. After they hung up, Samuel stood in the dark hallway for a long time, thinking about broken people finding each other in the wreckage of their lives. Monday came too fast and not fast enough. Samuel and Grace arrived at the estate at 7 a.m. to find Margaret already in the gardens wearing work gloves and holding gardening shears like weapons. I've been up since 4, she admitted. Couldn't sleep. So I started clearing the main path. Samuel looked at what she'd accomplished. Maybe 10 feet of pathway freed from weeds, her expensive jeans covered in dirt, her hair falling out of its ponytail. She looked more alive than he'd ever seen her. Grace and I brought supplies, Samuel said, unloading bags from his car. Seeds, tools, work gloves. I wasn't sure what we'd need. Everything, Margaret said. We need everything. They worked in silence, at first the three of them clearing years of neglect. Grace pulled weeds with fierce determination. Samuel tackled the larger overgrowth. Margaret moved from place to place, touching things benches Michael had positioned. Statues he'd chosen, plants he'd selected. He wanted a butterfly garden here, she said, stopping at a circular plot. Said butterflies were proof that transformation was possible, that something could be one thing, die to that life, and become something completely different and beautiful. Grace looked up, dirt smudged on her nose. Mama said that too. She said caterpillars don't die in the cocoon, they turn into soup and then rebuild themselves. She said it probably hurts, but it's worth it to have wings. Margaret stared at the little girl. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She was, Grace said matter-of-factly. She died anyway. Being wise doesn't stop cancer. The bluntness of it hung in the air. Samuel started to apologize, but Margaret shook her head. No, she said. She's right. Being wise doesn't stop death. Being good doesn't stop death. Michael was good and wise and kind, and he still died. Life isn't fair. But we're still here, Grace said. So we have to make it mean something. That's what Mama said. She said her dying would only be meaningless if we stopped living too. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't look away. What else did your mama say? She said the people we love never really leave us. They live in the things we do because of them. Like I paint now because Mama painted, and Daddy cooks her recipes, and maybe you'll wake up these gardens because Michael loved them. When did you get so smart? Margaret asked, smiling through her tears. Grace shrugged. I had a lot of time to think when I wasn't talking. They worked until noon, making barely a dent in the overwhelming job ahead, but it was progress. Visible, tangible progress. Margaret ordered lunch delivered, not fancy catering, but pizza like normal people ate. They sat on the steps of the mansion, eating with dirty hands and tired bodies. I haven't had pizza in 15 years, Margaret admitted. Michael loved it. After he died, I couldn't eat it. Reminded me too much of Friday nights when we'd get pizza and watch movies. What kind of movies? Grace asked. Horror movies. Michael loved being scared. Said it was thrilling to be terrified of something fake when real life was already scary enough. Samuel laughed. Emily loved horror movies too. I could never watch them too jumpy, but she'd watch them alone eating popcorn and yelling at the characters not to go in the basement. Did they ever listen? Margaret asked. Never. Samuel grinned. They always went in the basement. Grace giggled a sound so pure and unexpected that both adults stopped and stared. What? She asked, confused by their reactions. Nothing, Samuel said, his throat tight. Just haven't heard you laugh in a while, baby girl. Grace considered this. I guess I forgot how, but I remember now. That afternoon they worked harder. Grace discovered a fountain she insisted they clean. Samuel found Michael's garden journal in a shed, detailed plans and sketches notes about soil pH and sun exposure dreams written in a teenage boy's handwriting. Margaret held the journal like it was made of glass, her hands shaking. He wrote about wanting to create something that would last, she read aloud. Something that would still be beautiful long after he was gone. He said gardens were like legacies. They required patience and faith that future people would enjoy what you planted. Then we'll make sure they do, Samuel said. We'll bring his vision to life. Why? Margaret asked suddenly, looking up at him. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's because we need it. There has to be more. Samuel sat down beside her, watching Grace splash in the fountain. hearing her laughter echo through the gardens. "Because 6 months ago I was drowning," he said honestly. "Every day was about survival. Getting up, feeding Grace, going through motions that felt meaningless. I took this job because I needed money. But what I really needed was purpose, something bigger than just surviving. And maybe helping you wake up these gardens is that purpose. Maybe helping you means I'm helping myself too." Margaret looked at him with those intelligent, piercing eyes. "You're a good man, Samuel Carter." "I'm a desperate man trying to figure out how to keep living," Samuel corrected. "That's not the same thing." "Maybe it is," Margaret said. "Maybe good men are just desperate men who choose to keep trying anyway." That evening, as Samuel and Grace were leaving, Margaret stopped them. "Tomorrow's Tuesday. I have appointments. But Wednesday, would you come back Wednesday?" "We'll come back every day if you need us," Samuel said. "I need you," Margaret admitted so quietly he almost missed it. "I haven't needed anyone in 3 years, but I need you both. Is that okay?" Grace answered by running back and hugging Margaret around the waist. "It's more than okay," the little girl said. "That's what friends do." Margaret hugged her back, and Samuel saw what Grace already knew, that Margaret Whitmore wasn't the Ice Queen of Mystic. She was just another broken person trying to find her way back to life. Just like them. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday they worked in the gardens. Tuesday and Thursday, Samuel drove Margaret to her appointments, but now they talked. Really talked. She told him about building her company from nothing, about being the only woman in boardrooms full of men who thought she was a secretary, about proving herself over and over, until she'd forgotten why she was trying so hard. He told her about his dreams of being a teacher, about how Emily's medical bills had crushed those dreams, about learning that loving someone meant sometimes sacrificing everything. Grace painted. She painted the gardens as they were broken and overgrown, and she painted them as they would be alive with color and possibility. Margaret hung every single painting in her mansion, replacing the expensive artwork with a child's hope. One Wednesday afternoon, they were working on Michael's butterfly garden when a car pulled up. A young woman got out pretty and professional in a business suit. "Mrs. Whitmore," she called. Margaret stood brushing dirt from her jeans. "Yes." "I'm Alicia Rodriguez. I'm representing my grandmother, Maria Rodriguez, in a dispute with your company. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." Samuel saw Margaret stiffen, saw the walls start to go back up. "I don't handle day-to-day operations anymore," Margaret said coldly. "You'll need to speak with your company is evicting my grandmother." Alicia interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. "She's lived in that house for 40 years. 40 years she raised 5 children there. My mother died there, and now you're tearing it down to build luxury condos that no one in our neighborhood can afford." Margaret's face went pale. I'm not involved in... You own the company." Alicia's voice rose. "Your signature is on every document. How can you say you're not involved?" Samuel watched Margaret's face crumble, watched the progress they'd made start to unravel. "How many?" Margaret whispered. "What?" "How many families are being evicted?" 23, Alicia said. 23 families losing their homes so you can make more millions you don't need. Margaret swayed on her feet. Samuel stepped forward, steadying her. "I didn't know," Margaret said, her voice barely audible. "I signed off on development projects, but I didn't think about the people." "Well, maybe you should have thought," Alicia snapped. "You're right," Margaret said, and Samuel heard strength return to her voice. "You're absolutely right. Give me the details. All of them. Names, addresses, how long they've lived there. I'll fix this." Alicia blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "You'll fix it how the eviction notices have already been sent." "Then I'll unsend them," Margaret said firmly. "This is my company, those are my developments, and I'm telling you right now no one is getting evicted. Give me 72 hours. "Why should I trust you?" Margaret looked at Samuel, at Grace, at the gardens they'd been healing together. "Because I've spent 3 years destroying things without realizing it," she said quietly. "And I'm done destroying. It's time to start building something that matters." Alicia left with Margaret's personal phone number and a promise that seemed too good to be true. The moment her car disappeared, Margaret collapsed onto a bench, her head in her hands. "What have I done?" she whispered. "What have I been doing?" Samuel sat beside her. Grace climbed into her lap without asking permission, and Margaret's arms automatically wrapped around the little girl. You didn't know, Samuel said. I should have known. Just like I should have known Michael was dying. I was so busy building my empire that I never stopped to think about who I was stepping on to build it. So fix it, Grace said simply. You can't change yesterday, but you can change tomorrow. Margaret looked down at the child in her arms, this wise little soul who'd been silent for 6 months and now spoke nothing but truth. How do I fix something this big? The same way we're fixing the gardens, Grace said. One piece at a time. It takes a long time and it's hard work, but you just keep going. Margaret laughed a broken, slightly hysterical sound. When did you become my therapist? When you became my friend, Grace said. That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She spent hours on the phone with her executives, with lawyers, with accountants. By morning, she'd halted every eviction, personally called every family, and begun the process of converting the development project from luxury condos to affordable housing. It cost her millions. She didn't blink. Money, she told Samuel the next day, is just a way of keeping score, and I've been playing the wrong game. But fixing one problem revealed others. As Margaret dug into her company's practices, she found more predatory contracts, exploitative leases, developments that destroyed communities. She'd built an empire on other people's suffering without even realizing it. I'm a monster, she told Samuel one afternoon, sitting in the gardens with her head in her hands. I'm exactly what everyone says I am. No, Samuel said firmly. Monsters don't care when they find out they've hurt people. Monsters don't try to make it right. You're not a monster. You're just someone who made mistakes. Mistakes that destroyed people's lives. Then fix them, Samuel said, echoing Grace's words. You can't change what you did, but you can change what you do next. Margaret looked at him with desperate eyes. What if I can't fix them all? What if I've done too much damage? Then you fix what you can and live with the rest, Samuel said quietly. That's all any of us can do. Margaret stood determination replacing despair. I need to meet them, all of them. Every family my company hurt. I need to look them in the eyes and apologize. That's going to be painful, Samuel warned. Good, Margaret said fiercely. It should be painful. I should feel every bit of the pain I caused. So she did. Over the following weeks, Margaret met with every family her developments had impeded. She listened to their stories, heard their anger, accepted their pain. Samuel drove her to these meetings, watched her face each person with courage she didn't know she had. Mrs. Rodriguez invited them in for coffee. At 83, she moved slowly, but her eyes were sharp. You're the woman trying to take my home, she said. I was, Margaret said. I'm sorry, I'm so deeply sorry. Your home isn't going anywhere, and I'd like to repair any damage my company caused. Mrs. Rodriguez studied her. Why the change of heart? Margaret looked at Samuel, at Grace sitting quietly beside her. Because I've been asleep for 3 years, and these two woke me up. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Grief makes us sleepy. After my husband died, I slept for a year. Just went through motions, then my granddaughter had a baby and I had to wake up. Had to be there for them. How did you do it? Margaret asked. How did you wake up? Decided being alive was more important than being comfortable with being numb. Mrs. Rodriguez said simply. Same thing you're doing now. As they left, Mrs. Rodriguez hugged Margaret, a long grandmother hug that made Margaret cry. Thank you, Margaret whispered. Thank you for waking up. Mrs. Rodriguez replied. World needs more people who wake up. In the car, Grace said, See, people forgive you when you're really sorry. Not everyone will, Margaret said. That's okay, Grace said wisely. You just have to forgive yourself. That's the hardest part. Samuel met Margaret's eyes in the mirror and saw her understanding this 10-year-old child was teaching them both how to live again. The gardens were half alive when the real storm hit. It was a Thursday morning, 3 months into their work, when Samuel's phone rang at 6 a.m. Margaret's voice was shaking so badly he could barely understand her. Samuel, I need you. Please, I need you right now. He was at the estate in 20 minutes, Grace still in pajamas and half asleep in the back seat. Margaret met them at the door, her face blotchy from crying, a newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. They found out, she whispered, about Michael, about everything. Samuel took the paper. The headline screamed across the front page, Ice Queen's secret, shame dead son, drug addiction, and years of lies. The article was brutal. It detailed Michael's struggles, his overdose, Margaret's attempts to keep it quiet. But worse, it painted her recent changes as calculated PR moves. The eviction reversals, the affordable housing, even the garden restoration, all dismissed as a cynical billionaire trying to buy forgiveness. Who leaked this? Samuel demanded. Does it matter? Margaret's voice was hollow. It's all true. Every word. I did try to hide what happened to Michael. I was ashamed. I didn't want people to know that Margaret Whitmore, the woman who built an empire, couldn't even save her own son. Grace climbed out of the car and walked straight to Margaret, taking her hand. My teacher told everyone that my mama died, Grace said. And some kids were nice about it, but some kids said mean things. They said maybe if my mama had tried harder, she wouldn't have died. They said maybe she didn't love me enough to fight harder. Margaret knelt down, her hands on Grace's shoulders. Oh, sweetheart. That's not true. That's not how cancer works. I know that, Grace said. But it still hurt. And I wanted to hide. I wanted to pretend Mama never existed because it hurt less than people saying mean things about her. But Daddy said hiding doesn't make the pain go away. It just makes you lonely with it. Margaret looked up at Samuel, tears streaming down her face. She's right, Samuel said gently. Hiding doesn't help. I know you're scared, but maybe this is better. Maybe now you don't have to carry this secret anymore. They're calling me a monster, Margaret whispered. They're saying I killed Michael through neglect. They're saying everything I've done since is fake. Is it fake? Samuel asked. No? Then who cares what they say? He pulled her to her feet. Margaret, you can't control what people think. You can only control what you do. And what you've done, what you're doing, it matters. Those families you helped, they know it's real. Mrs. Rodriguez knows. We know. But everyone else doesn't matter, Samuel said firmly. This is your life, not theirs. You get to decide what it means, not some newspaper article. Margaret's phone started ringing, then ringing again and again. Her publicist, her lawyers, her board of directors, everyone wanting to know how to handle the scandal. Turn it off, Samuel said. I can't just turn it off, he repeated. Right now you need to breathe. You need to remember why you're doing this. Not for them, for you, for Michael. Margaret stared at her phone, then powered it down. The silence was deafening. What do I do now? She asked helplessly. We go work in the gardens, Grace said matter-of-factly. That's what we always do when things are hard. So they did. Margaret in her expensive pajamas and bare feet, Samuel in yesterday's clothes, Grace still in her unicorn nightgown. They worked in Michael's butterfly garden, planting flowers that wouldn't bloom for months, having faith in a future they couldn't see. By noon, cars had gathered outside the estate gates. News vans, reporters with cameras, people shouting questions. Margaret couldn't hear and didn't want to answer. They're like vultures, Margaret said bitterly, watching them through the garden walls. Then don't give them what they want, Samuel said. Don't hide, don't run. Just keep living, keep working, keep healing. That's the best revenge, becoming someone they can't touch. Margaret's lawyer called on Samuel's phone, frantic. Mrs. Whitmore needs to make a statement. We need damage control. The board is threatening to force her out if she doesn't. Margaret took the phone. Tell the board they can have my company. I don't want it anymore. Stunned silence, then. Mrs. Whitmore, you can't be serious. That's billions of dollars. I'm completely serious. Sell it. Give the money to charity. I don't care. I'm done building empires. I'm done pretending money matters more than people. She hung up. Samuel stared at her. Did you just... Yes, Margaret said, and suddenly she was laughing. Yes, I just quit. I just walked away from everything I spent 30 years building. And you know what? I feel free. For the first time in 3 years, I feel free. Grace clapped her hands. Now you can work in the gardens every day. Now I can work in the gardens every day. Margaret agreed, scooping the little girl up and spinning her around. But freedom came with a price. The media circus intensified. Former business associates gave interviews calling her unstable. Competitors circled her company like sharks. People who'd pretended to be friends disappeared. Samuel watched Margaret weather it all with a dignity he hadn't known she possessed. She didn't defend herself, didn't issue statements or hire crisis managers. She just kept showing up to the gardens, to the families she'd hurt, to the life she was building from the ashes of her old one. 2 weeks after the article, Margaret got a letter. It was from a support group for parents who'd lost children to addiction. They want me to speak, Margaret said, holding the letter like it might burn her. They said my story could help other parents. But I can't stand up in front of people and talk about failing Michael. You didn't fail him, Samuel said for the 100th time. Everyone thinks I did. Everyone else is wrong, Grace said, looking up from her painting. You loved him. That's what matters. Mama always said love doesn't fix everything, but it's still the most important thing. Margaret sat down heavily. I'm not brave enough for this. Yes, you are, Samuel said. You faced every family your company hurt. You walked away from billions of dollars. You're rebuilding gardens from ruins. You're the bravest person I know. Margaret looked at him with something in her eyes that made Samuel's chest tighten. Something that looked like hope and fear and gratitude all mixed together. Come with me, she said suddenly. To the support group, I can't do it alone. You're not alone, Samuel said. We'll be right there with you. The support group met in a church basement that smelled like coffee and old books. 15 parents sat in a circle, their faces mapped with the same grief that lived in Margaret's eyes. The facilitator, a kind-faced woman named Janet, welcomed Margaret without judgment. We've all seen the articles, Janet said. We've all read what they're saying about you, and we're all here to tell you they're wrong. Addiction isn't a failure of love, it's a disease, and every person in this room has felt exactly what you're feeling. One by one, they shared their stories. A father whose son died of a heroin overdose. A mother whose daughter hanged herself after years of struggling. A couple whose teenage son overdosed at a party while they thought he was safe at a friend's house. Different stories, same ending. Same guilt. Same what-ifs that haunted 3 a.m. like hungry ghosts. When it was Margaret's turn, she stood on shaking legs. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and my son Michael died 3 years ago from an overdose. He was 17. I was at a business dinner closing a multi-million-dollar deal when he died. I came home to find him cold in his bedroom with a needle still in his arm. Her voice broke, but she pushed forward. I thought if I made enough money, built enough success, proved I was valuable enough that somehow it would make up for not being there when he needed me. But it didn't. Nothing does. Nothing can. And I'm tired of pretending that success means anything when I failed at the only thing that mattered, keeping my son alive. She sat down, tears streaming freely. A man across the circle spoke up. Your son's death wasn't your fault. I should have seen. We all should have seen, he interrupted gently. That's what kills us, isn't it? The should-haves. I should have noticed. Should have asked more questions. Should have gotten better treatment. Should have loved harder. But we did love. We did try. And they still died, because sometimes love isn't enough, and that's the truth we can't accept. Margaret sobbed. Samuel put his arm around her shoulders, and Grace climbed into her lap, and they held her while she finally let herself break completely. After the meeting, several parents approached Margaret. Thank you for coming, a woman said. My daughter died 6 months ago. Everyone keeps telling me I need to move on and get back to normal, but there's no normal anymore. Seeing you here, seeing that you're still struggling 3 years later, it helps. It makes me feel less crazy. I'm not sure I'm the best example, Margaret said weakly. You're honest, the woman replied. That's all we need. Honesty about how hard this is. In the car driving home, Grace fell asleep against Margaret's shoulder. Samuel glanced at them in the rearview mirror, this unlikely family they'd become. Thank you, Margaret whispered, for making me go, for being there. That's what friends do, Samuel said, smiling. Is that what we are? Margaret asked. Friends. Samuel met her eyes in the mirror. I don't know what we are, but whatever it is, it's important. Something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them was ready to name, but both of them felt. The gardens continued to heal. Spring arrived early that year, and suddenly, everything they'd planted started to bloom. Michael's butterfly garden erupted in color, monarchs and swallowtails dancing through flowers he'd chosen years ago. Grace painted it obsessively, trying to capture the magic of life emerging from death. Margaret started attending the support group regularly. She spoke at schools about addiction and mental health. She funded treatment centers with money from selling her company. Slowly, painfully, she transformed her tragedy into purpose. But purpose didn't erase grief. It just made it bearable. One night, Samuel found her sitting in the garden at midnight, staring at Michael's memorial bench. Can't sleep, he asked, sitting beside her. I keep thinking about what that woman said about me being honest, but I'm not honest. I'm still hiding. Hiding what? Margaret turned to him, and Samuel saw fear naked on her face. How much I care about you. Both of you. How terrified I am of losing you. I lost Michael, and I can't survive losing anyone else I love. The word hung in the air between them. love. Margaret, Samuel said carefully. I know it's too soon. I know you loved Emily. I know you're still grieving. I know a broken billionaire with a dead son isn't exactly the best. Samuel kissed her. It was soft and brief and tasted like tears, but it was real. I loved Emily with everything I had, Samuel said when they pulled apart. I'll always love her, but she's gone. And I'm still here, and so are you, and Grace, and maybe that means something. What does it mean? Margaret whispered. I don't know yet, Samuel admitted, but I want to find out. Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in the garden Michael had dreamed, and Emily had inspired, surrounded by evidence that broken things could bloom again. I'm scared, Margaret said. Me too. What if we mess this up? We probably will, Samuel said honestly. We're both disasters, but maybe disasters are allowed to find each other. Maybe that's okay. Grace, Margaret said suddenly. What will she think? Let's ask her. Grace, as it turned out, had been waiting for this. Finally, she said when they told her the next morning, I thought you two would never figure it out. Samuel laughed. You knew, obviously. Grace rolled her eyes. You look at each other the same way Mama used to look at you, Daddy. Like you found something precious you thought was lost forever. Margaret knelt down to Grace's level. I'm not trying to replace your mother's sweetheart. No one could ever replace her. I know, Grace said simply. But Mama told me before she died that Daddy would be sad for a long time and maybe someday he'd find someone else to be happy with. She said that was okay. She said love doesn't run out just because one person dies, it just finds new places to grow. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. She said that to you. Grace nodded. She said you'd probably forget because you'd be too bad, so she made me remember for you. She said, tell Daddy it's okay to be happy again. Tell him I want him to be happy. Samuel pulled both Grace and Margaret into his arms and cried, not grief tears this time, but something else. Relief, maybe. Or permission. Or just the overwhelming recognition that life somehow was continuing. But just as things started to feel stable, just as this fragile new family started to take shape, reality crashed back in. Samuel's landlord called. The building was being sold. Everyone had to be out in 30 days. I can't afford anything else, Samuel told Margaret desperately. Not in Mystic. The rent here is insane. I'll have to move. Probably out of state. Find something cheaper. Margaret went pale. You can't leave. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. She grabbed his hands. Move in here, you and Grace. There's more than enough room. This house is too big for one person anyway. Samuel pulled away. I can't do that. Why not? Because I'm not your charity case, Margaret. I'm not some project you fix to make yourself feel better. Margaret recoiled like he'd slapped her. Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? Samuel's voice rose, months of fear and frustration boiling over. You spend your days fixing things, gardens, families, your reputation. Maybe I'm just another thing on your list to repair. That's not fair. Fair, you want to talk about fair, you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You could buy 100 houses without blinking, and I can barely afford rent. How is that fair? How is any of this fair? I didn't choose to be rich, Margaret shouted back. And you didn't choose to be poor, but we both chose to be here together trying to build something real. Don't throw that away because your pride is hurt. My pride? Samuel laughed bitterly. You think this is about pride? It's about Grace. She's already lost her mother. I can't let her get attached to you, to this place, to this life, just to have it ripped away when you get bored, or I can't afford to keep up, or reality catches up with this fantasy we're living. Fantasy? Margaret's voice dropped dangerously low. You think this is fantasy? You think I'm playing house? I love you, Samuel. I love Grace. I haven't loved anything in 3 years, and now I do, and you're telling me it's not real? I didn't say it's not real. Then what are you saying? Samuel sank onto the garden bench, his head in his hands. I'm saying I'm scared. I'm terrified. Because every good thing in my life gets taken away. Emily got taken away. My career got taken away. My home is getting taken away. And someday, somehow, this will get taken away too. And I don't know if I can survive losing you both. Margaret sat beside him, her anger dissolving into understanding. So you're leaving before you can be left, she said softly. Maybe. That's stupid. Samuel looked at her, shocked. Excuse me? It's stupid, Margaret repeated. It's cowardly and stupid and exactly what I did after Michael died. I pushed everyone away, fired people who cared, ended friendships, built walls so high no one could possibly hurt me again. And you know what it got me? 3 years of being dead while my heart still beat. 3 years of missing out on every beautiful thing because I was too scared of the painful things. Don't make my mistake, Samuel, please. I don't know how not to be scared. Then be scared with me instead of scared alone, Margaret pleaded. Move in, not because I'm rich or you're poor, but because Grace needs stability and I need you both and you need a home. It's practical, that's all, just practical. You're a terrible liar, Samuel said, but he was smiling through his tears. I'm out of practice, Margaret admitted. Say yes, please say yes. Samuel looked back at the house, the mansion that had seemed so cold and dead 4 months ago. But now he could see Grace's paintings in the windows, could see the gardens blooming around them, could see the possibility of a life he'd thought was over. Grace, he called. She'd been listening from behind a hedge, of course. She came running. Should we move in with Margaret? Samuel asked her. Grace looked at Margaret, then at the gardens, then back at her father. Is this about the money thing? Partly. Mama always said home isn't a place, it's people, Grace said. And Margaret's our people now, so yeah, we should move in. Out of the mouths of babes. Okay, Samuel said, looking at Margaret. Okay, but I'm paying rent. Something. Anything. I need to contribute. You are contributing, Margaret said. You brought me back to life. You can't put a price on that. Still. Fine, Margaret interrupted. You can manage the estate. The gardens, the property, everything. I'll pay you a proper salary. That way your pride stays intact and I get to keep you both. Deal. Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to protect himself, protect Grace, maintain some semblance of independence. But he was so tired of fighting, so tired of doing everything alone. Deal, he said. Grace squealed and threw her arms around both of them, and they sat there in Michael's garden while butterflies danced around them and the world kept turning, and life kept insisting on happening whether they were ready or not. That night, Samuel tucked Grace into her old bed for the last time. Are you happy, baby girl? He asked. Yeah, Grace said. I miss Mama. I'll always miss Mama, but I'm happy too. Is that okay? It's more than okay, Samuel said, kissing her forehead. Your mama would want you to be happy. She'd want both of us to be happy. She'd like Margaret, Grace said drowsily. They're the same kind of strong, the kind that breaks before it bends. Samuel smiled at his daughter's wisdom. When did you get so smart? I had good teachers, Grace mumbled, already half asleep. Downstairs, Samuel found Margaret on the phone with her lawyer making arrangements. She'd drawn up papers giving Samuel and Grace permanent residence rights, ensuring they couldn't be forced out, even if something happened to her. You didn't have to do that, Samuel said when she hung up. Yes, I did, Margaret replied. You need security. This gives it to you, legally in writing protected. You really do love us, Samuel said, still somewhat amazed by it. More than I thought I could love anything again, Margaret admitted. It terrifies me, but it also makes me want to wake up in the morning. So I'm choosing the terror. I'm choosing to risk it. Samuel pulled her close, and they stood there in the kitchen, where he'd once waited invisibly while she drifted past like a ghost. So much had changed. Everything had changed. We're going to mess this up sometimes, Samuel said. Definitely. We're going to fight. We're going to hurt each other. We're all carrying too much damage not to. Probably. But we're going to try anyway. Margaret pulled back to look at him. We're going to try anyway. Outside, the gardens bloomed in defiance of the death that had created them. Inside, 3 broken people built a family from the pieces of their shattered hearts. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what any of them had planned. But it was real. It was alive. It was theirs. And sometimes that's enough. Moving day arrived on a Saturday morning that felt like a beginning and an ending all at once. Samuel packed their life into boxes, Emily's paintings, Grace's toys, photographs of a family that used to be 4 and was now something else entirely. Grace stood in her empty bedroom, touching the walls one last time. Mama's still here, right? She asked suddenly. Even if we leave? Samuel knelt beside her. Mama's wherever we are, baby girl. She's in your heart, in your paintings, in the way you see the world. Moving houses doesn't change that. But this is where she died, Grace whispered. If we leave, are we leaving her behind? The question hit Samuel like a punch to the chest. He'd been so focused on the practical aspects of moving on the new beginning, it represented that he hadn't considered this. Come here, he said, pulling Grace close. Your mama isn't in these walls. She's not trapped here. She's free. And she'd want us to be free too. She'd want us to be happy, even if that means leaving the place where she said goodbye. How do you know? Because she told me. Samuel set his voice thick. The night before she died, she made me promise not to turn our home into a shrine. She said, don't let grief trap you in one place, Samuel. Keep moving. Keep living. Take grace and find joy wherever you can. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled away and ran to her closet, emerging with a small box Samuel had never seen before. Mama gave me this, Grace said, opening it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each labeled with different occasions. For my 10th birthday. For when you're scared. For when Daddy starts dating again. Samuel's breath caught. She wrote you letters. She said she wanted to be here for all the important things, even if her body couldn't be, Grace said. She pulled out one envelope marked, for when you move to a new home. With shaking hands, she opened it and read aloud. My darling Grace, if you're reading this, it means you and Daddy are moving. Good. That means you're not stuck. That means life is continuing, changing, growing. Home isn't about walls and roofs, baby girl. Home is wherever your people are, so if you're moving, it means you found new people to love. That makes me so happy. Don't be sad about leaving. This house held some beautiful memories, but it also held a lot of pain at the end. You deserve to live somewhere that doesn't smell like hospitals and sadness. Take the love with you. Leave the pain behind. I'll be with you wherever you go, I promise. Love, Mama. Samuel was crying openly now. Grace climbed into his lap and they cried together in that empty room. She knew, Grace said. She knew we'd be okay. She knew we'd survive, Samuel corrected gently. She knew we'd keep going. That's all she could hope for. An hour later, Margaret pulled up with a moving truck she'd rented herself, refusing to let Samuel hire movers. I want to do this, she'd insisted. I want to be part of it. She found them still sitting in Grace's empty room, tear-stained and exhausted. Second thoughts, she asked carefully. No, Samuel said. Just saying goodbye. Margaret sat down with them on the floor. Emily sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. She was, Grace said. Do you want to read her letter? She wrote one for when Daddy starts dating again, too. Samuel's eyes widened. Grace, no. But Grace had already pulled out the letter and handed it to Margaret, who looked at Samuel for permission. Go ahead, Samuel said, resignation in his voice. Apparently, Emily's going to parent from beyond the grave. Margaret opened the letter and read silently, her eyes filling with tears. When she finished, she handed it to Samuel. Dear whoever makes Samuel smile again. Samuel read aloud. Thank you. Thank you for seeing the man I fell in love with underneath all the grief he's carrying. Thank you for being patient with him. He's going to fight you at first. He's going to think loving you means betraying me. It doesn't. It means he's alive. It means he's choosing to keep his heart open, even though I broke it by dying. Please be kind to him. He's stronger than he thinks, but more fragile than he'll admit. And please love my Grace. Not like you're replacing me, no one could, but like she's yours too. She needs a mother figure. She needs someone who'll braid her hair and teach her about boys and help her navigate being a woman. I can't do those things, but you can, so please do. Love them both. They deserve it. They deserve you. And Samuel, if you're reading this over her shoulder like I know you are, stop feeling guilty. Stop thinking you're betraying me. I'm dead, honey. You're not. Live. Please just live. I love you forever, Emily. The three of them sat in silence, the letter between them like a blessing from the dead. She gave us permission, Margaret whispered. She always was bossy, Samuel said, laughing through his tears. I like her, Grace announced. I think she and Margaret would have been friends. I think so too, Margaret said, wiping her eyes. Come on, let's get you both home. Home. The word felt strange and right all at once. They loaded boxes into the truck, Margaret working as hard as Samuel, despite her expensive clothes getting dirty. Neighbors came out to help people who'd brought casseroles after Emily died, who'd checked on Samuel during the worst months. Mrs. Chen hugged Samuel hard. You deserve this, she said. You deserve to be happy again. I don't know if I'm happy yet, Samuel admitted. Then you deserve the chance to find out, Mrs. Chen said firmly. By evening, everything they owned was in the mansion. Grace ran through the halls, picking out her new room, not the guest room Margaret had suggested, but Michael's old room. Are you sure? Margaret asked, her voice tight. It's been empty since... It shouldn't be empty, Grace said simply. Michael wouldn't want it to be empty. He'd want someone to use it, to live in it, to make it happy again. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. She turned away, shoulders shaking. Samuel started to go to her, but Grace got there first. It's okay to be sad, Grace said, taking Margaret's hand. Mama's room was empty for a long time, too. Daddy couldn't go in there. But then one day he did, and he packed up her things, and he said it was time to let the room live again. That's what we're doing for Michael's room. Letting it live again. Margaret dropped to her knees and pulled Grace into a fierce hug. How are you so wise? I had good teachers, Grace said, echoing her earlier words. And also, I had a lot of time to think when I wasn't talking. You learn things when you're quiet. That night they ordered Chinese food and ate it on the floor of the living room because the furniture was all wrong and everything felt temporary and permanent at the same time. This is weird, Samuel said. Very weird, Margaret agreed. Good weird or bad weird? Grace asked. They looked at each other, then at Grace. Good weird, they said together. Grace grinned. Then we're doing it right. But doing it right didn't mean doing it easily. The first few weeks were an adjustment that felt more like a collision. Samuel kept trying to maintain boundaries that didn't make sense anymore. Margaret kept offering to pay for things, and Samuel kept refusing. Grace bounced between them, trying to smooth tensions neither adult wanted to acknowledge. You can't keep doing this, Margaret said one night after Samuel refused to let her buy Grace new school clothes. Doing what? Acting like accepting help makes you weak. I'm not acting like... Yes, you are. Margaret's voice rose. You're so determined to prove you don't need me that you're making everything harder than it has to be. I don't want to need you, Samuel shot back. Because what happens when you realize this was a mistake? What happens when you wake up one day and decide playing house with a broke single dad isn't as fun as it seemed? Margaret went very still. Is that what you think this is, playing house? I don't know what this is, Samuel said, exhaustion replacing anger. I don't know how to do this, Margaret. I don't know how to be with someone who has everything when I have nothing. You have Grace, you have yourself. That's not nothing. It's not enough. It's enough for me. Samuel sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up. That I'm going to disappoint you. That I'm not worth what you're giving up to be with us. Margaret sat beside him. What do you think I'm giving up? Peace? Quiet? Your perfect life without complications. My life wasn't perfect, Margaret said quietly. It was empty. You and Grace filled it with noise and mess and conflict and joy and purpose. That's not giving something up. That's gaining everything. You say that now. I'll say it always, Margaret interrupted. Samuel, I'm not going anywhere. I know you don't believe that yet. I know your wife died and your world fell apart and you learned that nothing is permanent. But I'm choosing to stay. Every day I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Choosing Grace. Choosing us. What if I can't believe it? Then I'll keep proving it until you can. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their fears hanging between them. I'm sorry, Samuel finally said. I'm sorry I keep pushing you away. I get it, Margaret said. I pushed everyone away for 3 years. I know how that works. How did you stop? Margaret smiled. You and Grace didn't let me. You kept showing up, kept being there, kept refusing to let me hide. So now I'm doing the same for you. I'm not going anywhere, Samuel Carter. Get used to it. Despite the rough patches, life found its rhythm. Samuel managed the estate and it turned out he was good at it, coordinating repairs, planning expansions for the gardens, hiring a small crew to help maintain everything. Margaret threw herself into philanthropy, using her fortune to fund addiction treatment and mental health services. Grace painted and thrived and brought light into every corner of the house that had been dark too long. Then Grace's 11th birthday arrived, and with it, complications no one had anticipated. I want to have a party, Grace announced. A real party with friends and cake and everything. Of course, Margaret said immediately. We'll make it spectacular. I want it here, Grace interrupted. At our house with my friends from school, and I want to invite Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Rodriguez and everyone from the garden project, and—" She hesitated. "And I want to invite Mama." Samuel's heart stopped. "Baby, what do you mean?" "Not like really invite her," Grace clarified, "but like have a place for her, a seat at the table, or her picture. Something so she's part of it. Is that weird?" "It's not weird," Margaret said gently. "It's beautiful." The party planning became a project that consumed all three of them. Margaret wanted to hire caterers and event planners. Samuel wanted to keep it simple. Grace wanted butterflies and flowers and yellow everything, because those were Mama's favorites. They compromised. Margaret provided funding, but Samuel did the work. They transformed the gardens into a celebration of life and memory and moving forward. The day before the party, Samuel found Margaret in Michael's room, Grace's room now, but it would always be Michael's room too. "Are you okay?" he asked. Margaret was holding a photograph of Michael at Grace's age, both of them frozen at 11 years old, separated by time and death, but connected by the woman who loved them both. "I never got to throw Michael a big party," Margaret said. "He died 2 months before his 18th birthday, and I'd been planning something huge, rented a whole restaurant, invited everyone he knew, and then he was gone, and there was just a funeral instead of a celebration. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Margaret said. "I'm not telling you this to be sad. I'm telling you because throwing Grace this party, it's healing something in me I didn't know was broken. It's giving me a chance to celebrate a child's life instead of mourning a child's death. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Margaret turned to face him. "I love her, Samuel. I love Grace like she's mine, and I know she's not. I know Emily is her mother and always will be, but I love her anyway." "She loves you too," Samuel said. "She told me the other day that she wishes she had 2 moms, one in heaven and one here. She said most kids only get 1 mom, but she got lucky and got 2. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She said that. They stood together in what had been a dead boy's room and was now a living girl's sanctuary, proof that spaces could be reclaimed, that love could be recycled, that nothing had to stay broken forever. The party was chaos in the best possible way. 20 kids ran screaming through the gardens while adults tried unsuccessfully to maintain order. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade tamales. Mrs. Chen brought enough food to feed an army. Margaret's support group friends came bringing their own healing children. And in the center of it all was Grace, radiant in a yellow dress, a framed photo of Emily prominently displayed on the gift table. "Thank you for coming, Mama," Grace whispered to the photograph. "I hope you can see this. I hope you know we're okay." Samuel watched his daughter blow out her candles, watched her make a wish he'd never know, watched her surrounded by people who loved her. And he felt Emily's presence so strongly, it was like she was standing beside him. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty air. "Thank you for letting me go, for pushing me forward, for loving us enough to let us find this." A hand slipped into his, and Margaret, covered in frosting from helping serve cake, grinning like a kid herself. "Happy?" she asked. "Yeah," Samuel said, surprised by how true it was. "I think I actually am." That night, after the guests left and Grace fell asleep surrounded by presents, Samuel and Margaret cleaned up together. "We're good at this," Margaret said, washing dishes while Samuel dried. "At what? Being a family. We're good at it." Samuel stopped the dish towel in his hands. "We are, aren't we? Surprising, right? Considering we're all disasters." "Maybe that's why we work," Samuel said. "We're all disasters together." Margaret laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen like music. "I have something to tell you." Samuel's stomach dropped. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least I don't think it is." Margaret dried her hands nervously. "The community center, the one in the neighborhood where we stopped those evictions, they asked me to join their board. They want to expand, create programs for at-risk youth, mental health services, addiction counseling, art therapy, everything I wish Michael had access to." "That's amazing." "It means being around teenagers a lot, kids Michael's age, kids who might remind me of him." "Is that a bad thing?" Margaret considered. 6 months ago, it would have destroyed me. Now I think maybe it's what I'm supposed to do, turn my grief into something that helps other people's kids. Make Michael's death mean something. "His death already meant something," Samuel said gently. "It brought you to us." Margaret smiled. "Yeah, it did. But I think it can mean more." I think maybe we can build something, a real program, a real legacy. For Michael, for Emily, for all the people we've lost. What did you have in mind? Her eyes lit up with an enthusiasm Samuel hadn't seen before. What if we opened the estate? Not all of it, but the gardens. Made them public. Created a healing space for families dealing with loss. We could have support groups here, art therapy sessions, garden therapy programs. We could help people the way Grace and you helped me. Samuel stared at her. You want to turn your private estate into a public healing center? Yes, is that crazy? It's either crazy or brilliant, possibly both. But you'll help me, Margaret asked. You'll be part of it. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought them here. A job nobody wanted. A grief-stricken billionaire, a silent child, and somehow impossibly it had all added up to this purpose and meaning and family born from ashes. Yeah, he said. I'll help you. Margaret threw her arms around him, and they stood in the kitchen, holding each other while the dishes dripped dry and the house settled around them. I never thought I'd be happy again, Margaret whispered. I thought happiness died with Michael. I thought the same thing when Emily died, Samuel said. But maybe happiness doesn't die. Maybe it just transforms, like butterflies. It has to break down completely before it can become something new. Did Grace teach you that? Grace teaches me everything. They pulled apart and Margaret looked at him with eyes that saw everything, his fears, his scars, his desperate hope that this time, finally something good would last. I love you, she said. I know it's fast, I know we're still figuring this out, but I love you and I need you to know that. Samuel's breath caught. He'd known it, of course, had felt it growing between them, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that terrified him. I love you too. He said the words, feeling like jumping off a cliff. I love you and it scares me to death. Good, Margaret said. Being scared means it matters. They kissed in the kitchen, surrounded by party debris and dirty dishes and the ordinary mess of living, and it felt like a promise neither of them was sure they could keep, but both of them wanted to try. Grace appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Are you guys done being mushy? Because I had a nightmare and I need both of you. They went to her together, this family stitched together from loss and hope. They climbed into her bed, Michael's bed, and held her while she cried about dreams of her mother she couldn't quite remember. Tell me about her, Grace said. Tell me something I don't know. So Samuel did. He told her about Emily's terrible singing voice and her habit of talking to plants and the way she'd dance in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. And Margaret added her own story. My Michael did that too. Danced when he thought I wasn't looking. Sang off key in the shower. They would have liked each other, I think. Emily and Michael. They're probably friends now, Grace said sleepily. In heaven or wherever people go. They're probably hanging out watching us, making sure we don't mess this up. Then we better not mess it up, Samuel said. We won't, Grace mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. We're family now. Family doesn't mess up. They just keep trying. Samuel and Margaret lay on either side of Grace, watching her sleep, this child who'd lost her mother and found another who'd taught two broken adults how to live again. She's right, you know, Margaret whispered. We're family. Yeah, Samuel agreed. I guess we are. Outside, the gardens bloomed in darkness, invisible but alive. Inside, three people who'd been drowning separately learned to swim together. And somewhere, maybe two souls who'd loved them watched and smiled and whispered their approval to the wind. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. It was better because it was real, built on truth instead of fantasy, on acceptance instead of denial, on the radical choice to keep living even when living hurt. Grace stirred between them, mumbling in her sleep. Love you, Daddy. Love you, Margaret. Love you, Mama. Past and present, death and life, grief and joy, all existing together in one small person who understood what the adults were still learning. That love doesn't end. It transforms. It grows. It finds new homes and new hearts while still honoring the old ones. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, it gives you a second chance at happiness you never thought you deserved but somehow found anyway. The morning after Grace's party, Samuel woke to find her side of the bed empty. Panic seized him for a moment, that old fear that everyone he loved would disappear before he heard voices and laughter from downstairs. He found Margaret and Grace in the kitchen, making pancakes, flour everywhere, both of them covered in batter. We're making butterfly pancakes, Grace announced. Margaret's teaching me. I'm trying to teach her, Margaret corrected, laughing. But apparently I'm not very good at this. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, watching them, feeling something settle in his chest. This was what Emily had wanted for Grace. Not a replacement mother, but an addition. Someone else to love her, teach her, be there for the moments he couldn't handle alone. What? Margaret asked, catching his expression. Nothing, Samuel said. Just thinking how lucky we are. Daddy gets mushy in the mornings, Grace informed Margaret. I'm learning that, Margaret replied, flipping a pancake that looked nothing like a butterfly. The Healing Center project consumed the next few months. Architects came and went, drawing up plans to convert part of the estate into accessible public space while maintaining privacy for their home. Margaret met with therapists and counselors and people who understood trauma. Samuel coordinated construction and landscaping, making sure Michael's vision for the gardens remained intact even as they expanded. And Grace painted. She painted the transformation, documenting each stage. Her art teacher at school called it remarkable, a child's perspective on grief and healing captured in watercolor and hope. I want to donate them, Grace told Samuel one evening. When the center opens, I want my paintings there so people can see that sad things can become beautiful. Are you sure, baby, these are yours? Mama used to say, art isn't really yours until you share it, Grace said. She said keeping beauty to yourself makes it smaller, but giving it away makes it grow. Samuel hugged his daughter, overwhelmed by her generosity, by how much of Emily lived on through her. But not everything was easy. The community pushback came in waves. People who'd called Margaret heartless now called her calculating, said the Healing Center was just another PR stunt, another way for a rich woman to buy forgiveness. Let them talk, Margaret said when Samuel brought her the latest editorial criticizing her motives. I'm not doing this for them, I'm doing it for the families who need it, for the kids who are struggling, for everyone I should have helped years ago but didn't. It still hurts, though, Samuel said, having people question everything. Of course it hurts, but you know what hurts more? Knowing Michael needed help and I was too proud to get it for him because I was worried what people would think. I'm done caring about opinions. I only care about outcomes now. The Healing Center opened on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Samuel had first driven Margaret to the hospital. They called it Michael's Garden, and the sign at the entrance read, "A place for broken things to bloom." Hundreds of people came. Families who'd lost children, parents struggling with addicted kids, people drowning in grief who needed somewhere to surface and breathe. Mrs. Rodriguez cut the ribbon with hands that shook from age and emotion. This is what community looks like, she said to the crowd. Not buildings and businesses, but people helping people. Thank you, Margaret, for waking up. Thank you, Samuel and Grace, for being the alarm clock. Grace's paintings hung in the main building, a gallery of transformation. Visitors walked through them crying, seeing their own journey reflected in a child's brushstrokes. I see my daughter in these, one woman said to Grace. She died 2 years ago. Car accident. And I've been stuck in gray ever since. But your paintings, they show the gray and the color together. They show that both can exist. They have to exist together, Grace said wisely. You can't have one without the other. That's what makes life real. The woman hugged Grace and cried on her shoulder, and Margaret watched from across the room with tears streaming down her own face. She's remarkable, Janet from the support group said, appearing beside Margaret. That child has an old soul. She does, Margaret agreed. She's been through too much too young, but somehow she came through it with more compassion instead of less. Like someone else I know, Janet said meaningfully. Margaret smiled. I had good teachers. The center became exactly what they'd hoped, a refuge for people who needed permission to grieve and guidance on how to live anyway. Support groups met in the gardens, art therapy sessions filled with teenagers who looked like Michael might have looked if he'd lived. Families planted flowers in memory gardens, creating beauty from loss. Samuel ran the daily operations, and he was good at it. Better than good. He had a gift for seeing what people needed before they asked, for creating space where healing could happen organically. You should have been a counselor, Margaret told him one evening as they walked through the gardens after closing. Maybe in another life, Samuel said. In this one, I'm exactly where I need to be. With me, with you, with Grace, with this, all of it. Margaret stopped walking and turned to face him. I want to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before answering. Samuel's heart started racing. Okay. Would you marry me? Whatever Samuel had been expecting, it wasn't that. What? Marry me? Margaret repeated, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Not because it's been long enough or because it's what people do, but because I want to. Because I want you to be my family legally, officially, permanently. Because I want to adopt Grace if you'll let me. Because I want to build a life with you both that doesn't have an exit strategy or an expiration date. Samuel stared at her, his mind racing. Margaret, I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a year. I know there are 1,000 reasons to wait, but I've learned something this year tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Michael taught me that. Emily taught you that. And I don't want to waste the time we have being cautious when we could be committed. What about Grace? Samuel asked. Did you talk to her about this? Margaret laughed. She asked me last week why we weren't married yet. Said all her friends think we already are. Said she's tired of explaining our situation, and can't we just make it simple? That sounds like Grace. So, Margaret pressed, what do you think? Samuel looked at this woman who'd been a ghost when he met her and was now so vibrantly alive it hurt to look at her sometimes. He thought about Emily's letter giving him permission, about Grace asking for a mother, about the life they'd built from ruins. Yes, he said. Yes, I'll marry you, on one condition. Margaret's face lit up. What condition? You let me propose to you properly, with a ring and a plan and everything Grace will want to tell her friends about. Deal, Margaret said, and kissed him right there in Michael's garden while butterflies danced around them like blessings, and Samuel planned the proposal for weeks. It had to be perfect for Grace, for Margaret, for Emily's memory, for Michael's legacy. It had to honor where they'd been and celebrate where they were going. He chose a Saturday afternoon when the center was closed. He decorated the main garden with lights and flowers, created a path through Grace's favorite spots, and listed Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Rodriguez to help with the surprise. Nervous, Mrs. Chen asked as they waited. Terrified, Samuel admitted. What if I'm doing this for the wrong reasons? What if I'm just afraid of being alone? Are you? Mrs. Rodriguez asked pointedly. Samuel thought about it honestly. No, I love her. I love who I am with her. I love the life we've built, but I'm scared I'm not enough. That eventually she'll realize she could have done better. That woman walked away from billions of dollars to build a healing center for strangers, Mrs. Chen said. You think she makes impulsive decisions? She chose you. She keeps choosing you. Trust that. Grace came running up, dragging Margaret behind her. Daddy, Margaret, you have to come and see something in the garden. Grace, I'm in the middle of... Margaret started. Please, Grace insisted, and Samuel hid his smile. His daughter was a terrible actress, but an enthusiastic conspirator. Margaret let herself be pulled through the garden, following the path Samuel had created. At each station, there was a memory photos from their first day working together. Grace's paintings, letters from people they'd helped, moments captured and preserved. What is this? Margaret asked, her voice shaking. Keep going, Grace urged. The path led to the fountain where Grace had played on that first working day. Samuel waited there, and despite all his planning, his mind went blank when he saw Margaret's face. Hi, he said stupidly. Hi, Margaret replied, tears already streaming. Samuel dropped to one knee and Grace squealed beside them. Margaret Whitmore. Samuel began, his voice steadier than he felt. A year ago, I took a job nobody wanted because I was desperate and broken and drowning. You hired me to drive you around while you haunted your own life. We were both ghosts, both so deep in grief we couldn't see daylight. Margaret was crying openly now. But then something happened. You met Grace, Grace met you. And slowly, painfully, we all started to come back to life. You taught me that being broken isn't the end. Grace taught us both that love doesn't run out just because someone dies. And together we built something I never thought I'd have again, a family. He pulled out the ring he'd chosen, simple, elegant, with a butterfly design that honored both Michael and Emily. I don't have billions to offer you. I can't give you an empire or a perfect life or a guarantee that we won't hurt each other sometimes. But I can give you this: I will show up every day. I will choose you every morning. I will love Grace, and I will love you, and I will build a life with you that honors everyone we've lost while celebrating everyone we still have. Will you marry me? Margaret dropped to her knees beside him, not caring about her expensive dress or the dirt or anything except this moment. Yes, she sobbed. Yes, yes, yes. Samuel slipped the ring on her finger, and Grace threw herself at both of them, and they fell into a heap on the ground, laughing and crying and holding each other while their friends cheered. Can I call you Mom now? Grace asked Margaret. Margaret pulled back to look at her. You can call me whatever feels right, sweetheart. I want to call you Mom, Grace said. Not instead of Mama. Mama's still my mama. But you're my mom. Is that okay? It's more than okay, Margaret whispered, pulling Grace close. It's the greatest honor of my life. They planned a small wedding in the garden. No elaborate ceremony, no society guests, just the people who mattered. Mrs. Rodriguez and Mrs. Chen stood as witnesses. Janet from the support group officiated. Grace was the flower girl and the ring bearer, and the entire wedding party rolled into one enthusiastic package. Margaret wore a simple white dress. Samuel wore the suit he'd worn that first day of work, cleaned and pressed, but the same a reminder of how far they'd come. The vows they wrote themselves. I promise to keep choosing you, Samuel said. Even when it's hard, even when I'm scared, even when my grief tries to convince me I don't deserve happiness. I promise to honor Emily by loving you, not by forgetting her. I promise to be the father Grace needs and the partner you deserve. I promise to keep showing up, Margaret said. I promise not to run when things get difficult. I promise to love Grace like she's mine while respecting that she'll always be Emily's too. I promise to turn our pain into purpose and our grief into grace. I promise to build a life with you where both our angels are always welcome. Grace stepped forward without being asked. I promise to be the best daughter to both my moms, she said solemnly. To Mama in heaven and Mom here on earth. I promise to keep painting and keep growing and keep reminding you both that sad colors make the bright ones shine better. I promise we're going to be okay. All of us. Together. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands engraved with butterflies. They kissed while their friends applauded. They danced to a song Emily had loved, and somehow it felt like blessing instead of betrayal. She'd be happy for us, Samuel whispered to Margaret as they swayed together. I know, Margaret replied. I feel her here. Her and Michael both, celebrating with us. That's not weird. Nothing about us is normal. Margaret laughed. Why start now? The reception was cake and laughter and stories about people who weren't there but somehow were. People shared memories of Michael, his kindness, his humor, his dreams. People shared memories of Emily, her art, her wisdom, her fierce love. We're not forgetting them, Mrs. Rodriguez said, raising a glass. We're including them. That's what love does. It grows big enough to hold everyone living and dead. To Michael and Emily, the guests chorused. To second chances, Samuel added. To broken things that bloom, Grace said, and everyone laughed through their tears. That night, after everyone left and Grace finally fell asleep, Samuel and Margaret sat in the garden under the stars. We did it, Margaret said. We actually did it. Did what? Survived. More than survived, we're thriving. A year ago, I was barely alive. Now I'm married. I'm a mother. I run a healing center. I have purpose and love and family. How did that happen? You let it happen, Samuel said. You could have fired me that first week, could have kept your walls up, could have stayed safe and alone and miserable, but you didn't. You took a risk on me and Grace. You let us in. Best decision I ever made, Margaret said. Second best, Samuel corrected. The best decision was deciding to wake up. The rest just followed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the gardens they'd healed together, thinking about the people they'd been and the people they'd become. Do you still miss her? Margaret asked quietly. Emily. Every day, Samuel admitted. But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. Now it's more like she's part of my foundation instead of my wound. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. That's how I feel about Michael. He's not my pain anymore. He's my purpose. Do you think they know? Samuel asked. About us? About all this? Margaret looked up at the stars, at the vast universe that held mysteries they'd never understand. I think they know. And I think they're proud of us for not giving up, for choosing to keep living even when living hurt. Grace says they're our friends now. Samuel smiled. In heaven or wherever. Says they're watching us to make sure we don't mess it up. Then we better not mess it up. We won't, Samuel said with certainty he hadn't felt in years. We've got this. The healing center flourished. By the end of their first year, they'd helped over 500 families. They expanded to include addiction counseling, financial assistance for therapy, and scholarships for kids who wanted to pursue creative fields like Michael had dreamed of doing. Grace's art gained recognition. A local gallery wanted to exhibit her grief series. She was only 11, but her work spoke to something universal, the way beauty and pain intertwined, the way growth required breaking first. "I want the money to go to the center," Grace announced when the gallery offered to sell her paintings, "so other kids can get help." "Grace, that's your work," Samuel protested. "You should keep the money." "Mama always said art was meant to help people," Grace replied. "What helps more, me having money or kids getting therapy?" Margaret hugged her tight. "You're going to change the world, kid." "I'm just doing what you and Daddy taught me," Grace said, "turning sad things into good things." On the first anniversary of Michael's garden opening, they held a celebration. The gardens were in full bloom, butterflies everywhere, life erupting from every corner of what had once been a monument to death. Alicia Rodriguez came with her grandmother. The families who'd almost been evicted came with their children. Janet brought her entire support group. People whose lives had been touched by the center, by Margaret's transformation, by Samuel's quiet strength, by Grace's artistic wisdom. "I want to say something," Margaret announced, standing on the steps where she'd once sat broken and alone. The crowd quieted. 2 years ago, my son died, and I died with him. I walked through life like a ghost, building wealth without purpose, succeeding without meaning. I hurt people without realizing it. I was so deep in my own pain that I couldn't see anyone else's." Her voice was strong, clear, unashamed. "Then a desperate single father took a job nobody wanted, and he brought his daughter with him, and they woke me up. They didn't fix me, you can't fix grief, but they taught me to live with it, to honor it, to transform it into something that helps instead of hurts." She reached for Samuel's hand, for Grace's hand. "This center exists because Michael died. That will always be true. But it also exists because Samuel and Grace refused to let me stay dead, because Mrs. Rodriguez and her neighbors forgave me. Because every person here chose to believe that people can change, that redemption is real, that broken things can bloom." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. "My son can't come back. Emily can't come back, but their love can continue through us. Their dreams can live through this place, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's how we honor the people we've lost. Not by staying broken, but by using our brokenness to help others heal." The crowd erupted in applause. Grace buried her face in Margaret's side, crying happy tears. Samuel wrapped his arms around both of them, his family, his purpose, his proof that life continued even after you thought it had ended. Later, as the sun set and the celebration wound down, the three of them walked through the gardens alone. They stopped at Michael's memorial bench at the butterfly garden he'd designed at the fountain where Grace had played. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Margaret asked. "Of all this?" "I think he'd be amazed," Samuel said. "His mother, the unstoppable businesswoman, becoming the unstoppable force for healing instead." "I think he knows," Grace said, pointing to a monarch butterfly that had landed on the bench. "See, he's here." They watched the butterfly, its wings opening and closing slowly, catching the last light of day. "Thank you, Michael," Margaret whispered. "Thank you for teaching me, even in death, what really matters." The butterfly took flight, dancing through the air before disappearing into the garden. "Come on," Samuel said. "Let's go home." Home. The word that had felt impossible now felt inevitable. They walked back to the mansion that was no longer a mausoleum, but a home filled with light and laughter and love. Grace ran ahead, calling back to them. "Hurry up, slowpokes. I want to paint the sunset before it's gone." Samuel and Margaret walked hand in hand, taking their time, savoring the moment. "Are you happy?" Margaret asked. Samuel considered the question seriously. A year ago, he would have said happiness was impossible, that it died with Emily, that the best he could hope for was survival. But now, watching Grace run through gardens they'd healed together, holding the hand of a woman who'd been a stranger and became a partner, living in a home that served a purpose bigger than any of them, now happiness felt not just possible, but real. "Yeah," he said, and meant it completely. "I'm happy. Are you?" Margaret smiled, and it reached her eyes transformed. Her face made her look like someone who'd found her way home after being lost in the dark for years. "I'm happy," she said. "I'm finally genuinely, impossibly happy. And it doesn't erase the pain of losing Michael. It doesn't fix the years I was barely alive. But it coexists with all of that. The grief and the joy living side by side." "Like Grace's paintings," Samuel said. "Exactly like the Grace's paintings." They reached the house just as Grace was setting up her easel on the back patio, determined to capture the sunset before it faded. Perfect timing, she called. Come sit with me while I paint. So they did. Samuel and Margaret sat close together, watching Grace work, watching the sky turn impossible colors, watching their daughter create beauty from the ordinary magic of a Tuesday evening. This is it, isn't it? Margaret said quietly. This is what we were working toward. Not some grand destination, just this. Ordinary moments that feel extraordinary because we're alive to experience them. Yeah, Samuel agreed. This is it. Grace turned from her canvas paint smudged on her nose, pure joy radiating from every part of her. I love you both so much, she announced, as if it were breaking news instead of something they said every day. We love you too, baby girl, Samuel said. To the moon and back, Margaret added. To the stars and further. Grace countered the game they played every night. To infinity, they said together. Grace grinned and turned back to her painting, capturing the moment with brush strokes that would fade in time, but the memory would last forever. The sun set over Michael's garden. Inside the mansion, dinner waited. Beyond the gates, the healing center stood ready for tomorrow's families, tomorrow's grief, tomorrow's hope. The world kept turning, life kept happening. And three people who'd been drowning separately learned not just to swim, but to float to rest, to trust that the water would hold them if they stopped fighting so hard. Samuel Carter had taken a job nobody wanted, and it became the best decision of his life. Not because it paid well or advanced his career, but because it led him here to this woman, this child, this purpose, this home. Margaret Whitmore had hired a desperate stranger, and it became her salvation. Not because he drove her places, but because he drove her back to life, back to purpose, back to the possibility that broken hearts could love again. Grace Carter had lost her mother and found another, had learned that love multiplied instead of divided, that families could be built and rebuilt and built again, that the people we lose never really leave us if we carry them forward with courage. The single dad, the ice queen, and the silent child. An unlikely family born from impossible circumstances. Proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. They went inside together as darkness fell, turning on lights that pushed back the shadows, filling the house with warmth and sound and life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families needing help, new growth in the gardens, new paintings from Grace, new purpose to pursue. But tonight they were just a family having dinner together, sharing stories, laughing at Grace's jokes, being ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And somewhere, maybe two souls who'd loved them, watched and smiled and whispered to the universe, well done. You finally figured it out. Love doesn't end. It transforms. It blooms. It continues. Always, always it continues.